Hey everybody, it's your pal from the PAL region, Pal Palson here, and we're back again with another dose of weird games nobody else has bothered to review. Wheel Edition. As always, we'll be playing 3 obscure and forgotten games chosen entirely at random, and also 1 bonus game chosen by you, the lovely viewer. I hope you're ready for one of the most eclectic lineups of games we've seen yet. The wheel knows you're hungry, and don't you worry, it will provide.
The wheel will provide.
Sweeping up the floors and squeegee up that oil! It's time for the main event! Oh yeah! Look at him go! Ooh, that new red rocker must have a handsome pappy! Don't you think that blue, baby?
Yeah, and his face will look a lot more like yours once stakeout is done with him.
Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena!
First up, we have Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena, making its way to the PlayStation in December 2000 as a North American exclusive. I think it's fair to say Rock'em Sock'em Robots is one of the most iconic toys ever made. The concept is simple: you've got a red robot and you've got a blue robot, and you've got to box the heads off one another until you literally box the head off of one of them.
My block is knocked off!
Top tier entertainment. Now, my familiarity with this toy actually comes from its many appearances and references throughout various different forms of media. The actual toy itself, I have never seen in the flesh. Not at a friend's house when I was a kid, not at toy shops. As far as I can tell, at least from the early 90s onwards, Rock'em Sock'em Robots just wasn't a thing here in Ireland.
You knocked his block off! Come with me.
We did have karate fighters though. That's kind of the same thing, right? So needless to say, without any sense of Rock'em Sock'em nostalgia clouding my judgment, I had no real expectations coming into this PS1 release, a fighting game loosely based off the toys. You generally assume it's gonna be bad because it's a fighting game based off a boomer toy from the 1960s, but upon starting the game, I came across something that instantly gave me a glimmer of hope. Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena was developed by Paradox Developments, a team responsible for 4 other fighting games released on the PlayStation, all of which are actually pretty good. We have Trill Kill, the 4-player arena fighter that was deemed so violent it never actually seen an official release. Wu-Tang Shaolin Style, a reskinned version of Trill Kill that is notably less violent, but has the Wu-Tang Clan this time around, which I feel is a pretty good compromise. And there's the 2 X-Men Mutant Academy games, which I took a look at on the channel previously and found to be 2 genuinely good fighters. Plus, mentioning the games gives me an excuse to show this clip again, which for obvious reasons I will continue to use whenever possible. So with Paradox, we've got a developer with a proven track record in both traditional and arena style fighting gameplay, and that's a good thing because Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena is a game that kinda utilizes both styles. One minute it's a traditional fighting game, the next you're running around an arena dodging projectiles or trying to get power-ups. It's an interesting mix of styles, but nowhere near as interesting as the robot fighters themselves. Now, as for the Rock'em Sock'em branding, of course you'll see familiar favourites like Red Robot and Blue Robot, and no doubt you'll be bopping a few heads off from time to time. But outside of that, the game itself really could just exist as its own separate entity called Big Robot Fighting Game. This isn't a simple game about trying to take your opponent's heads, it's a game about building up a robot by using a selection of different parts and weapons, and then using that big robot to smash up other robots and take their parts so you can do it all over again. The game features a few of the usual fighting game modes like your training, your 1v1 battles, but the meat of the game lies within the career mode. In this mode, you choose from a selection of different robots and aim to fight your way to the top of the illustrious Robot Fighting League. This involves you fighting through a ladder of different opponents one by one until you eventually take on the champion and aim to get promoted to the next league. These battles are simple 1v1 fights, but winning doesn't just bump you up the rankings, it also nets you some cash. Whenever you beat a robot, its parts will then appear in the store, which you can buy to essentially give your robot the moves of your opponents. If one guy is pissing you off with a move, beat him up and then use the same move to piss off the next guy. The store isn't the only way to acquire parts though. During battles, if enough damage gets dealt to a single section of a robot, the part might break off, rendering it unusable for the rest of the match. And if it was an enemy robot that lost that part, you also get rewarded with the part at the end of the fight. There's a lot of different parts to collect, and better yet, as you move through the career mode, you begin to unlock upgraded versions of each part as well, which give you even more moves and ways to damage your opponent. Honestly, this is actually really cool. It's a surprisingly experimental fighting game, as it allows you to kind of build your own fighter that suits your specific fighting style. And between all the different parts, there is a huge amount of flexibility and choice available. It is genuinely impressive. But the thing is, while this game is full of great ideas and concepts, the experimentation doesn't really mean a thing if the fighting system itself isn't up to the task, and in this case, it's not very good. So the way combat in this game works is both very simple and incredibly confusing. Each of the 4 face buttons represent one of the 4 parts on your body. Square and triangle are your left and right arms, X is your legs, and circle is your torso. The torso is the only part that is specific to each individual character, otherwise you can connect any combination of legs and arms that you like. Now the thing is, every single move in this game is different depending on the parts you use. Now I'm not just talking about special moves, I'm talking mids, lows, highs, jabs, low kicks. Everything is specific to the part. Now while the idea itself is really interesting in theory, the execution is where the problems lie. Each different part has only like 4 or 5 moves total. Special moves, combos, even just a simple kick. Yeah, roughly 4 or 5 per part, sometimes even less. This means while there's a lot of customization available, every part feels like it's kind of missing something. Now I'm not expecting a Tekken 7 moves list here, but this game would have significantly less attacks per character than the likes of Tekken 1. And since the goal of this game is kind of similar to Tekken in that you want to find moves that string together to allow you to pull off combos and juggle your opponent, the lack of moves actually make the fighting feel really limited. I did manage to find a set of parts that I liked after some experimentation, but even when I felt like I had a grasp on the capabilities of my character, it never felt like I could execute more than 2 or 3 moves in a string. My tactics worked and I could win fights confidently and easily, but it just never really felt satisfying, just kinda stiff and clunky. Another issue that kind of hampered my ability to experiment was the lack of an in-game moves list. Other Paradox games have this, so I'm not sure why it isn't present here. GameFAQs doesn't even have a moves list for this game, so in this case we had to go old school and consult the manual to actually learn how to use each part. Thankfully the move lists are really simple and oftentimes copied from part to part, but having to reference a manual every time I wanted to try something different actually made me turn off trying new parts and instead maybe stick to learning a smaller number of parts and just trying to refine my skills with those abilities instead. The game also drops the ball with the battle arenas. I feel there's like 4 arenas total, not including the training arena, which visually don't differ a whole bunch from one another. The arenas themselves kind of feel like a missed opportunity as a whole because the gimmick of being able to run around them freely like an arena fighter is pretty much only ever needed to reach these health zones, which give your robot a portion of your life back. I personally would have loved to see some Robot Wars style traps and pitfalls unique to each arena to make the locales and fights a little more dynamic, but maybe that's just me. At least the engine Paradox has been using since Trill Kill seems to be holding up pretty well. It is definitely starting to show its age at this stage, but the robots look nice and detailed and the game runs really smoothly too. Music wise, we have a surprisingly dancey techno soundtrack as well, although I'll probably get some flack for this, but outside of a few select tracks, the music here is really kind of generic and forgettable for the most part. Fine for background music, but nothing I'll be listening to in my spare time, that's for sure. whole time playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena, one thought just kept going through my head. Wow, this is such a cool idea for a fighting game. I just wish it was better. It's clear Paradox put in the effort and tried to make something a cut above the usual licensed video game. The robot designs and parts are really cool. It's got a bunch of unlockable boss robots that promote multiple playthroughs of the career mode. There's some cool cutscenes and CG dotted throughout the game. And also some of the special moves and grab animations look really good. It never gets old. But the fighting gameplay is unfortunately just so clunky, limiting, and kinda boring that the game just crumbles beneath all these interesting ideas. Despite there being a huge amount of customization with the different moves assigned to each part, even the best robot setup here doesn't feel as good or fleshed out as a fighting game character that's being designed with a singular defined moveset and playstyle. Don't get me wrong, the more I played this game, the more I did warm up to it. There's always going to be something satisfying about two big robots smacking each other around, especially when one of them is a samurai and the other is a dinosaur. But it'll never be a fighting game that you'll play for the combat itself, and without good combat, there's nothing to really keep you sticking around for more than just an hour or two of curiosity. It's a shame because if I was to rank all 5 of Paradox's PS1 fighting games, this one I'd unfortunately have to put at the bottom. And while I initially expected this to be the worst of the bunch, what I didn't expect is for this game to actually have some of the boldest and most experimental ideas of any fighting game on the system, which makes its failings all the more disappointing.
The wheel will provide.
Next up, we're going to take a look at Hybrid, a game with a pretty interesting history. Hybrid comes from a development studio called Motive Time. Now, as far as I can tell, these guys were based in the UK, and the only game of theirs that I'm familiar with is a pretty odd 3DO game called Virtuoso. It's a third-person shooter where you play as this Dog the Bounty Hunter looking dude. I've never played it myself, but believe me, I've seen tons of videos on it, and the general consensus is that it's surprisingly pretty good. Well, maybe just good by 3DO standards, I don't know. Anyway, using the engine made for Virtuoso, Motive Time's next project would end up being a game for the PlayStation called Hybrid. Although instead of being in third person, Hybrid would fall back on the more tried and tested first person shooter formula, bringing the PS1 another Doom style FPS. Although here's where things get a little bit confusing. So Motive Time finished up Hybrid in 1997 and the game made its official release on the PlayStation. Although for whatever reason, only in Japan. You would imagine this UK-made PlayStation exclusive FPS would at the very least see a release in its home region, but down to what I can only imagine was a lack of a publisher deal or some other publishing related issue, it just never did. Although in a weird twist of fate, Hybrid did somehow eventually manage to snag itself a release in the PAL region, only 5 years later in 2002, and through the infamous Midas Gold series of budget PS1 titles. Now, as we've already mentioned on this channel, every now and then companies like Midas would opt to bring over low-budget Japanese titles to the West, usually as long as the localization efforts were pretty easy. Well, in this case, Midas have managed to import a UK-made FPS from Japan, so that it's now actually playable in its home country for the first time ever. Sure, maybe it's 5 years too late and they gave it some of the laziest box art you'll ever see, but yeah, it's here. Now we have to keep in mind, Hybrid was originally a 1997 release for the console, so as a game it is a very 1997 experience. Shoot the enemies, collect the keys, press the switches, rinse and repeat until you finish the level. But does Hybrid offer any interesting ideas of its own? Well, let's find out. So Hybrid does have a story, well, as long as you can read the game's incredibly fast text scrolling. Basically, the US government were experimenting with creating human-alien hybrids, with the government supposedly exchanging human bodies to other species in return for advanced technology. Yeah, that sounds believable to be fair. Well, as you'd imagine, that didn't go very well. So fast forward into the future, where we're now part of a resistance fighting against hybrid alien-human fascists called the International Purity League. Yeah, let's just go with it. Now, interestingly, Hybrid gives you not one, but 4 playable characters, all of which sporting this delightful deviant art-esque artwork. They give the game some variety. Each of the characters have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. You can play as the cyborg George Mackenzie, who can target enemies using this cool Robocop style green reticule. An ally alien, that's just named Alien. This guy is a little slower than the other characters, but he has more resistances as well. He also has this useless melee attack, but at least the starting weapon is pretty good. Brad Chesterfield is kind of your vanilla character, no real notable strengths or weaknesses, but he does gain access to some of the better weapons a little earlier in the game. And finally there's Akiko Tyler, the token anime character. She is by far my favourite character in the game. She starts with probably the worst gun in the whole game, but to make up for it she's the quickest, has the highest health, and can also shoot a powerful fireball that uses a tiny bit of health as ammo. Well worth it in my opinion. Plus you can also get a good gun for her pretty much immediately into the first level by opening up the secret door located right behind you. So yeah, Akiko's the best. Each character also gets their own story segments before each mission with more amazing artwork, which is very much appreciated. Text is still too damn fast though. Now as for the gameplay, well, I'm sure this all looks pretty familiar to you. It's very much that classic Doom style boomer shooter gameplay, but the game does opt for a blend of 2D and polygonal 3D graphics throughout. Your weapons, items, and the HUD are all rendered as 2D sprites, while the environments are all made using polygons. The enemies in the game are actually a mixture of 2D sprites and 3D models, but more often than not the enemies you'll be fighting will be big 3D boys. Some much bigger than others, mind you. The game uses the default early 90s first-person shooter control scheme. D-pad controls your forward and back movement as well as rotations, L1 and R1 lets you strafe left and right, and all your other commands including jumping, shooting and interacting are all on the face buttons. You can also look up and down while holding R2, but thankfully the game does automatically adjust your height when aiming, even if it looks a little bit wonky while doing it. Honestly, the game itself, as long as you're down with old school FPS control schemes on console, it doesn't control too bad. I'm not going to say it's very good, as it does feel a little stiffer than some console FPS games. The turning in particular is much too slow for my liking. It can make lining up shots on quicker enemies a bit of a nightmare. But look, when you've got yourself some good weapons, some big targets and tons of ammo, shooting things does feel good, and some of the weapons here have a really nice punch to them as well. The game's weapons once again stick very closely to that Doom formula. You've got 5 different ammo types that are usable with a pretty big roster of weapons. They all mostly fit that pistol, shotgun, machine gun, plasma, rocket launcher mold, but there's usually a few different variations of each type of weapon, giving the game more options than your usual FPS. It is a shame that they don't often feel that much different from one another, but the added variety is nice. My personal favourite weapon is the Arasaka DF2 Fletchet launcher, which I'm going to say is this game's version of the super shotgun. It kills standard enemies with one hit, knocks them back, and makes even most of the robot enemies explode on impact. Very, very nice. So look, so far so good for Hybrid, right? Well, in what I'm sure is a surprise to no one, Hybrid does in fact have some pretty big issues. For one, on the visual front, Hybrid has a whole host of problems. It's a very, very dark game. Hybrid knows this, and it has a whole item dedicated to helping you brighten up rooms a little bit. I don't know if the idea here was to show off some cool lighting effects, as you and your enemies' gunshots can light up rooms and there's plenty of light switches all around. But for the majority of the game, the vision is very, very limited. Beyond what you'd expect from normal draw distance limitations, it's more so just dark by design. Although a reason for this might be to hide this game's incredibly bland environments. This might be one of the most uninspired FPS games I've played in terms of environmental design. It doesn't matter what level you're on, it is guaranteed to be very, 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 very grey. For every cool or unique part of the level that you'll find, the remaining 95% is gonna be grey. Hybrid, putting it simply, isn't a very good looking game. But hey, maybe it runs well at least. Well, I I mean, you're seeing emotion, what do you think? Now, in fairness to Hybrid, we're looking at a 3D FPS from 1997, but also now in the PAL format. So the game itself actually isn't running too unlike comparable FPS games from the era, but still you'll be looking at a cool 15 to 17 frames per second on average during your playthrough. Although credit where credit is due, the game did remain smooth and stable throughout the majority of my playtime. Now look, the visuals and performance are something that I can take or leave as long as the game itself is fun. But unfortunately, in spite of Hybrid's somewhat decent shooting gameplay and controls, the game has a few more roadblocks in your way. Enemies in this game are fine for the most part. You'll of course come across your standard robot grunts, a few tricky hybrid enemies, and some more dangerous elite enemies from time to time. All of these are fine, but unfortunately the most annoying enemy in this game is also the most common. These little things are known as spheres. These guys on their own are really nothing more than a nuisance. They don't really do much damage, they die quickly. What's the problem? Well, they move very erratically, which in a game with good aiming wouldn't be an issue. But in a game with very slow turning on the D-pad, they are a nightmare to kill. You will waste so much ammo trying to kill these guys that you end up despising them within the first hour of gameplay. And every new level in the game is delighted to start packing more and more of these into big arenas for you to deal with. You'll be fighting deadly enemies with about 20 of these other things zooming by you, tricking your auto aim into going up, down and all over the place. It is a nightmare. Did I also mention they add in big machines that spawn them infinitely until they are destroyed? It can become a mess. Also, it's one of those games where if you die, you start the level with no weapons, and honestly, some of these levels begin with so many of these sphere enemies at the start that it can feel impossible to even get your footing. Difficulty is another interesting topic, as the game starts off pretty easy, but by the 4th level or so, the game's difficulty curve just goes through the roof. I actually had to quit and try change the game to easy, but it turns out the default difficulty actually was easy. So there you go. Although my main issue with this game, and the one that turns me off more than anything, is actually just a personal problem. This game is low budget PS1 Hexen. Now I'm sure some of you are familiar with Hexen. It was basically Doom in the Dark Ages. It came from Raven Software and also received a port on the PlayStation. Hexen shares a few things in common with Hybrid. For example, Hybrid's character system seems to be a take on the same one featured in Hexen, allowing you to choose from 3 different styles of gameplay. Now this feature I quite like in both games, but the reason I dislike Hexen is because its levels are giant maze-like maps filled with an obnoxious amount of switches and keys to find. It is a game about being lost, wandering endlessly through the same areas over and over again, praying that you find a key or a switch that you missed the first 4 or 5 times through. Well, Hybrid is also like this. The game has massive maps, full of different keys and switches to find. One switch might open a door halfway across the map, then that door will give you another switch, and then that door will give you another switch. And this can go on for about 40 to 50 minutes until the level just eventually ends. It is a good thing that this game has a decent automapper, otherwise I would have been lost forever in some of these levels. Now I get that this isn't technically bad game design. Some people may like big maps and the pixel hunting that goes involved with them, but I really do not. And at least in Hexen, you can save anywhere. If you die 35 minutes into a level of Hybrid, well, you're back to the beginning with no weapons. So it is a nightmare. So yeah, Hybrid, it's kind of a mixed bag to say the least. It's a pretty competent PS1 FPS with some fun gameplay, less than stellar visuals, annoying enemies, and some design choices that, let's just say, aren't my cup of tea. Although at least one thing I can fault in the game is the sound. Each of the levels have their own unique music tracks, and considering how long some of these levels are, I never found myself getting sick of any of them throughout. The soundtrack is nothing groundbreaking by any means, but it's very catchy and suits the atmosphere of the game really well. I liked it a lot.
Toys for the boys. Ammo.
Each of the characters also have these goofy voice lines that they spout out all the time. I'd say these are certainly an acquired taste, but I honestly never got sick of hearing these whenever they popped up.
Come and get it! Great! Excellent! Milk go.
Toys for the boys.
I suppose for those curious, we might as well take a quick look at the Japanese version as well. Other than the text scroll being the correct speed this time around, the game itself is completely unchanged from its PAL counterpart content-wise. Of course, this version sees a bump in the frame rate to around 17 to 19 frames per second on average, which does make the game smoother, but not by a whole lot. Although I did notice that this version had more severe slowdown in some of the more densely populated areas, so maybe the PAL version is actually the more stable of the two? Who knows? This version does also have the English voice lines though, which is pretty funny.
Oh! Toys for the boys.
So yeah, that's Hybrid, a very obscure and interesting tale of how a UK FPS eventually made it home. But as for the game itself, yeah, it's okay. It's a budget Doom clone that mostly copies ideas from other games to various degrees of success. The gameplay itself can be fun and entertaining for a while, and I'm unironically a big fan of the characters and story artwork, but there's a few annoying design choices that I think let the game down and really prevent it from being anything more than an interesting curiosity for fans of console boomer shooters. Still, if you want to check it out, the PAL version does usually go for pennies these days, probably due to the box art looking like this, I guess. Either way, you could certainly do a whole lot worse.
Yes! Next! Yes!
The wheel will provide.
The next game in today's lineup is Aironauts, making its way to the PlayStation in 1999, and I hope you're not sick of that PAL frame rate, because this time we've got a PAL exclusive on our hands. Hardcore fans of the channel might remember me trying a demo of this game during one of my live streams. Opinions on the game were mixed, but let's just say I was intrigued enough to want to try the full thing someday. And I guess the wheel was listening, because here we are a short while later, full thing in hand. Thanks, wheel. On development duty this time around, we got the team at Red Lemon Studios, a Scottish studio made up of ex-Gremlin Interactive staff who mostly seem to focus on licensed movie tie-ins across the PC and PS1 for the duration of their relatively short life as a studio. Of course, Aironauts here is the outlier, being their one and only original IP, as well as their debut game as a studio. So let's see if that initial intrigue from the demo was warranted and find out if it's actually any good. I suppose a good place to start would be explaining what Aironauts is, because as you may have noticed by now, this game is kind of odd. The game takes place in some sort of steampunk dystopian future where prisoners are randomly selected to take part in some sort of flying blood sport. Once selected, these prisoners become what's known as Aironauts, and using their weird jet-propelled hang glider things, you're going to complete challenges across many of the world's most treacherous prisons, which have also conveniently been converted into tightly packed arenas suited to just such an event. Quite the concept, I've got to say, but the people watching at home, they seem to enjoy it, so at least you can't argue with the ratings. But as far as the story content goes, this opening here is about all that you're going to get. Now, initially, I thought this game was going to be some sort of flying twisted metal. You've got weird characters, guns, and battle arenas. It seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, surprisingly, Aironauts turned out to be something quite different. What we have here is actually pilot wings, but with guns. Well, it's also a little like Twisted Metal, but Pilot Wings is for sure this game's main inspiration. Once you learn how to fly in the game's training mode, which I actually only discovered for the first time after I'd already beaten the game, well, you're ready to dive right in. So, Aironauts begins with you selecting from one of 8 different characters. Each character has variants of the same weapons, a reliable rapid-fire shot, your ever-dominant homing missiles, and there's also a bunch of special weapons you can pick up that give you things like shields, big lasers, and crazy buffs to your machine guns. Now, while the weapons are generally the same across each character, the stats on the other hand can vary wildly in terms of speed, maneuverability, armor, and overall damage. Maybe you want a fast flyer or somebody with lots of armor. Maybe you just want to play as Honk the Clown. I don't mind. You do you. Once you're into the game, you'll see this big old grid going all the way down the screen. This grid represents each individual challenge in the game, and we've got a grand total of 50 to conquer if we want to make it to the illustrious grand final. These events come in a number of different shapes and sizes. You've got non-combat orientated challenges like races, stunt ring challenges, and switch hunting. But if you like blowing stuff up, there's plenty for you here too, with the likes of mine detonation, drone hunting, and protection missions. During each stage of the campaign, you'll travel to a new arena and are then tasked with beating 4 different challenges that you can complete in any order. The challenges themselves are kind of bite-sized, usually taking anywhere from a couple of seconds to 3 or 4 minutes at most. Once you beat all 4 of the challenges in an arena, you then get to enter a one-on-one fight with the Lord of the arena, and if you can conquer them, you get to move on to the next arena and the next set of challenges. Another fun addition to this game is its upgrade system. Throughout the different challenges, you can collect these wing icons from enemies, item boxes, and just doing well during the challenges. Once you clear all of the challenges in a section, you can then use your accumulated wings to upgrade one of 4 different things: lives, armor, speed, and weapons. Armor, speed, and weapons are pretty self-explanatory, but lives? Yeah, this game also has lives. If you fail a challenge or get destroyed mid-level, you lose a life, lose all of your lives, and then you're back to the very beginning, or your last save point at least. These upgrades become pretty important as the game goes on, offering significant buffs to your character, so you'll want to earn lots of these and spend them wisely. So I guess you can probably see why this game comes across as pilot wings with guns. It's mostly just a collection of bite-sized flying challenges, and while there is plenty of shooting involved, really the main focus of this game is to test your flying skills. You see, the arenas in this game are actually quite small. You could easily fly from one end to the other in just a matter of seconds, but what the arenas lack in circumference, they make up for in sheer verticality, incorporating lots of little nooks and crannies hidden across multiple levels of the arenas, giving them more depth than what you'd think. It's actually quite clever because you have big potential for interesting flight patterns and enemy layouts, while also keeping the play area itself quite small, allowing there to be more on screen at once with practically 0 draw distance limitations whatsoever. Now when you're starting out the game, you're going to play through the first 4 arenas. These opening arenas I'm going to say are like the training levels of the game. I know I just said earlier I accidentally skipped the training, but they did actually feel like a nice introduction to the game and its maps. Although I was thinking that they were maybe a little too easy for their own good, but thankfully it turns out the first 4 stages of the competition is the game's normal mode, with the final 6 stages seeing you replaying the previous 4 areas again with new, harder challenges, and then unlocking 2 more extra difficult arenas to take on. Once the game entered hard mode, this is where I really started to enjoy it. Challenges were much longer, the maps were littered with enemies, and now you have an AI rival chasing you and harassing you across the entire map. It never felt overly tough, but whether you were flying through rings or taking out drones, the events were always challenging and engaging. Plus the arenas that you previously played through now have this ominous dark skybox to emphasize that extra danger. Now, even though you've got 50 different challenges in the game, you will see a lot of the challenges begin to repeat themselves throughout. It doesn't help that many of the challenges are just slight variations on the same thing, like hunting and shooting barrels or hunting and shooting drones. But I think the main reason I enjoyed this game as much as I did came down to one thing and one thing only: the flying itself. Aironauts uses a pretty simple arcade-style flying model where you can boost by pressing square or slow down by using the circle button. Plus you can use the L1 and R1 buttons to take sharper turns or do loop-de-loops and barrel rolls if you like. That's about all there is to it. Nothing complex or fancy here, but credit to Red Lemon on this one. The control is just so responsive and easy to master that it makes flying a dream. And in a game that is all about flying challenges, to have flying be the star of the show, that's what you love to see. Flying through rings? Great. Searching out little nooks and crannies? Great. If you need to make a precise maneuver or quickly change direction? No problem, the Aironauts have got you. Obviously, this maneuverability does vary from character to character, and it has been eclipsed by newer games in the years since, but for the PS1, this is some of the best flight control I've seen on the console. It's the one thing this game needed to nail, and it absolutely did it with style. Now look, so far it's been mostly glowing praise for this game, but let's reduce the altitude a little bit and take things back down to earth, because for all this game does right, it does have some notable problems too. For one, the game visually is just all over the place. Gameplay here is super hectic and busy. There is oftentimes so much on screen that it can be a nightmare trying to make things out. And the ever reliable 16 to 17 frames per second PAL frame rate really ain't making things any better. Now look, the game itself, it does look decent on the graphics and technical end, and the frame rate, as rough as it is on the eyes, is stable at the very least. It's just during the gameplay, it can feel like it's a bit much on the eyes sometimes. Also, I am sorry, but these character designs, I can appreciate the style and aesthetic they were going for with these guys, but they are not my cup of tea at all. Even Honk the Clown. Sorry Honk fans, I'm just more of a doink guy, what can I say? Although I do like this health bar at the very least, because I mean, look at it. Just make sure not to lose any health though, because then things start going south pretty fast. Look, I think Aironauts is a technically competent game that is pretty at times, but also very ugly, if that makes any sense. Also, while I generally enjoyed each and every one of the challenge levels present in the game, the 1v1 battles on the other hand are very, very bad. The problem here comes down to the opponent's AI. You see, the AI in this game is both too good and mind-numbingly stupid. Ideally, in a dogfight, you'd want to maneuver around your opponent and chase them from behind, right? Well, the AI in this game, it just won't let you do that. It will circle you forever and just begin to chase you from behind no matter what. Any traditional attempts to fight these guys will be met with severe frustration, so I don't recommend doing that. Instead, you can beat every opponent in this game by just hovering slowly in one position and rotating around to shoot the enemy. For whatever reason, the AI just shits the bed whenever you begin to do this. It has no idea how to counter somebody sitting still, so no matter what point you are at the game, this will work 100% of the time, every time. Now this may seem cheap and lazy, but believe me, if you did these fights properly, you'd probably end up quitting the game before the end. They are that bad. On the flip side though, if you beat all of the game's challenges, you get to take part in the game's only good combat challenge, an 8-person free-for-all inside a football stadium. Surprisingly, adding more opponents into the mix actually alleviates the issues of 1v1 fights, as the AI then tries to focus on other pilots and it now just becomes hectic, stupid fun. It is a crying shame that this is the only point in the game that you can fight like this, but it is a fun and stupid way to close out the main game. Also, we haven't talked about the music in this game yet, but since it is a European game, you better believe the music is great. It's a very of the era electronic soundtrack with a bit of rock thrown in as well, but there is not a bad track in this whole game. I bring this up now because the final stage, called Alcajaz, has by far one of the best tracks in the game. Club PlayStation level contender over here.
Yeah! You want to get some more help? Oh! Ah! I felt that one!
Seriously, this soundtrack is a nice hidden gem on the console. You know, if the videos on YouTube have less than 1,000 views and the only comment is from me, you've struck gold. It's also worth mentioning the game's announcer as well, who you're gonna either love or hate, but he is very, very strange. I personally couldn't get enough.
Just cool as ice. What can I say?
Overall, I had a good time with this one. It starts out a bit slow, but by the time you make it to the hard levels, the game really begins to shine. I don't think it will be everybody's cup of tea, but if you like skill-based flying games and bite-sized challenges, well then I think you'll dig it. As mentioned, it's not a strong game visually, at all, and the 1v1 battles are definitely a low point, even if you can cheese them in no time. It's also not great for replayability either. You've got 50 total challenges and one big final battle to play through, but doing that only takes a little over 2 hours, and guess what? Outside of the training mode, this is the only mode in the game. No free battles, time trials, not even any multiplayer. This is strictly bite-sized skill-based challenges only. And maybe worst of all, there's seemingly nothing to unlock either. No characters, no arenas, outside of trying a new character, that's about all there is to it. Definitely not the most content-rich experience. But if you can overcome all of that, Aironauts offers up some fun and challenging arcade flight action, great music, some of the butteriest flight controls on the system, and of course, our boy, the man, the myth, the legend, Honk the Clown. See, it's more good than bad.
Fly! Detonator! Get a move on!
You will provide.
Our final game and viewer selection for Volume 8 is The Raven Project, another PAL exclusive making its way to the PlayStation in late 1996. This game was added to the wheel by Doma, so big congrats on being the wheel's chosen. Well, I wonder what kind of game Doma has in store for me today. Oh no. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's Cryo again, and not just any Cryo PlayStation game. I believe this is their very first to have come out on the console. To be honest, I didn't expect to see a Cryo game again so soon after Dreams and the odyssey that was Pax Corpus, but at least regardless of quality, we're probably in for something interesting at the very least, so let's get right into it. Now, similarly to Dreams, the Raven Project was first released on home computers, coming out a whole year before the PlayStation version. There's actually not a lot of footage online for this PC version of the Raven Project from what I can tell, but as you can see, the game seems to be a mixture of 3D space shooter with some FMV rail shooter segments. The gameplay actually seems to be very similar to the Star Wars Rebel Assault series of games. I don't know if the Raven Project took much influence here, but it was definitely the first thing that popped into my mind. Now, unlike Star Wars Rebel Assault 2, which also saw a PS1 port that's pretty faithful to the PC original, the PS1 version of the Raven Project pulled a Dreams again, where on the PS1, we seem to have a totally different game built from the ground up, but still uses the cutscenes and music from the PC original. What we have here is more of a traditional spaceflight sim on the PS1. You fly one of many different spacecraft around the 3D environment, shooting at various different 3D enemies. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you may even get to pilot a land-based vehicle like a walker or a mech. It's a tried and tested formula that's been done to great success on the PS1, as we've already seen with the likes of Blast Radius and Colony Wars. But you gotta keep in mind, the Raven Project is both a pretty early release in the PlayStation's lifecycle, and it's also a Cryo game, so Colony Wars this is not. Hell, it ain't even Warhawk. The Raven Project is a whole other beast altogether. Now, as you'd imagine, this is a single player only affair, with our goal being to play through the game's 28 different missions across 5 chapters. There is a story here, but don't you worry, we'll get to that. Missions in this game are usually broken up into 1 or 2 categories: kill every enemy on the map or fly to every objective on the map. These missions can sometimes be mixed up by adding things like having to defend an ally ship, or instead of flying to a satellite, you could be flying to a ring instead. But fundamentally, the mission variety here is very, very limited. Missions can take anywhere from about 5 minutes to 30 seconds, and the amount of repetition throughout this game's runtime is mind-blowing. You could play 3 different missions in the same location with the same objectives, 3 times in a row, to the point where you start thinking that you've restarted the previous mission by mistake. Now, to the game's credit, it does mix things up on rare occasion, with 2 of the missions seeing you need to move slowly through some enemy bases, and 1 mission where you need to fly through a series of rings in order. Jesus, big episode for rings, isn't it? But even with the odd change from the usual mission dynamic, not one of these 28 missions would I consider good. Of course, that's not down to the mission design alone. Frankly, that is the least of this game's worries. You see, the Raven project plays like absolute dirt. Never have I played a game where the mission begins and you're immediately going at full speed crashing into an asteroid. So the controls themselves are actually really straightforward and simple. D-pad controls your movement, R1 and R2 control your speed, X to fire, and there you go, that's about all there is to it. No extra movement controls, no rotations, no flips. Nice and simple is the aim of the game here. Although the thing is, every single vehicle in this game has 2 speeds, really slow, and way too fucking fast. When I first started this game, I was going all over the place, and a few missions in, nothing really changed. I found it really hard to ever get your speed in the right place to actually approach enemies. I'd usually fly right by them or just crash right into them. And rarely did I ever even get a chance to react thanks to the game's abysmal draw distance. This is present across pretty much every vehicle in the game, and there's maybe 5 or 6 in total, but whether you're walking on land or you're up in space dogfighting, the control is just all over the place. Now, as the game went on, I did eventually get used to it. By the final few missions, I actually had a pretty good mastery over the controls as a whole, and was able to breeze through the final missions, but I could never hold my hand on my heart and say that it's good. It's really, really bad. But the movement is only half the battle. The shooting is actually my biggest pet peeve with this game. For whatever reason, this game relies on a weird lock-on system that's activated by pressing the circle button. Every time you press it, the target rotates clockwise through every enemy on the field. It points you in the direction and then highlights them, making for an easy kill. Or so you would think. The first problem is your weapons will only fire in the direction of the locked on enemy. So for example, if you're facing one enemy directly ahead of you and you've locked onto an enemy on your left, the bullets will shoot off to the left towards the targeted enemy, missing both enemies completely. Now you might just say, well, why don't you target the enemy in front of you? Well, you see, there's no way to target your nearest enemy. You just have to go through every single one by one, until you target the enemy you want. By then, you've already likely flown by onto a new enemy. But Sean, I hear you say, why don't you just not use the target lock and try aim freehand with your shots? Well, unfortunately, I can't. Once the target lock is up, there's no way to get rid of it. And if you manage to somehow not have a target lock, simply shooting any enemy automatically brings it back up. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Of course, compounding this already frustrating design choice, the lock-on doesn't even work that well. I swear, the only way you can hit enemies in this game is if you are directly in front of them or directly behind them. It doesn't matter if you are circling, above, below, to the sides, whatever, you will probably just miss. It doesn't matter if your target reticule is on them, the bullets will just go wherever the hell they want to go. Maybe your bullets will just cross over one another, because that was the style at the time. Now, if you can get used to the game's controls, its frustrating combat and lock-on system, and also the fact that it's almost impossible to play the game outside of the first-person view due to them not giving you a target reticule in third person, well then you can probably get through the game just fine. Except for the fact that all of its missions are also terrible. Okay, so we are being a bit hard on the Raven project here. Let's talk about a few things that I did like about the game. I actually quite dig the very mid-90s UI we got going on here. The pre-mission briefings have these fun mini-map effects, and the transitions from screen to screen I found charming in a weird way. Also, the weapon system is kind of interesting, letting you choose from a variety of different types prior to every mission, and also letting you customize the arsenal to your liking, assuming you only use up the craft's allotted space. It's a shame that only about 2 of these weapons are actually useful, but yeah, you know, it's a nice effort at least. As for the presentation, it's well, the music is kinda good. Probably the least interesting soundtrack I've heard in a Cryo game so far, but there are some catchy songs here, and some really, really odd ones too. rest of the sound, however, whoever decided to pack this game full of alarms and make it so that you can hear your ally ships whenever it gets damaged, well, thank you for the pounding headache. I really appreciate it. And the visuals, I mean, look, all these maps are fundamentally the same as one another. If it's on the surface, the draw distance is beyond abysmal, and whatever geometry is there, well, let's just say it's not looking so hot. Space, on the other hand, is, well, it's space. It's not a very attractive take on space, but it's space. The positive here is that the draw distance is a little bit better. A little. They also added asteroids for a level or two at the very end to mix things up. So, you know, that was an attempt. The ship and enemy models are also not very nice, but they aren't the worst that I've ever seen. Probably the thing they put the most effort into, really. So yeah, that's a little positive, I guess you could say. And as for performance, well, we're sitting in 15 to 25 frames per second PAL territory, with many a bout of slowdown throughout. Although, oddly, in the space section, sometimes the frame rate fluctuates wildly upwards to 50 frames per second when there's no enemies on screen. And you can tell very quickly that the game was not designed to run at this speed. It looks like I'm speeding up the gameplay here, but no, this just actually happens from time to time. So yeah, as a game, the Raven Project, probably the worst PS1 game of its style that I've played on the console. I really wasn't expecting much, to be fair, but this time around we don't even get to experience some of that charming cryo weirdness that makes even their worst games still offer up some entertainment value. But hold up, there's still some hope. You see, the Raven Project actually comes on 2 discs, believe it or not. And if your game has more than 1 disc, you better believe the game is packed with some serious FMV. And what if I told you that the Raven Project doesn't just contain a whole bunch of FMV, but it also contains live action cutscene? Maybe there's still hope for this game after all. But it turns out no, not really. So the live action scenes. As you probably know by now, I am a sucker for anything live action in my 90s video games. I can literally not get enough of it. And when I first started this game, I knew I was in for a treat. I mean, the game literally shows you this guy within the first few seconds of the game. How could you not be intrigued? This stuff right here is why I decided to beat the game. Every boring mission, every frustrating section, I knew I needed all of this that I could get. And you know what? Even this stuff is kind of boring too. How do you make this boring? Granted, there are still some absolute gems from time to time, but the majority of the live action scenes meet this midpoint of mildly competent acting and really uninteresting script that is neither entertaining or funny. Really, the only interesting parts are the antagonists, and there is unfortunately not enough of them. Too many of the scenes are just boring military jargon between your allies, and it's just so dull. I honestly didn't even really get where the story was going. I believe aliens rule the Earth and you're part of a resistance trying to take them down, while the aliens and pro-alien humans are trying to take you down. Frankly, the plot is all over the place, and many of the plot lines don't even match up with the missions. It's clear these are here to lead you into the PC version's levels, but here it's just a totally unrelated mission altogether. Sometimes the cutscenes cut out before they're even finished, and the subtitles can also be cut off from the left of the screen. It's just not good. Worse yet, the majority of the FMV in this game are actually just CGI scenes of your ship, and my god, I have never seen so many different clips of the same thing framed in different ways. Here's you taking off, here's you landing, here's you taking off, here's you landing, you're flying over here, you're flying over there. Rarely does anything ever happen in any of these scenes. No dialogue, no action. I promise you the majority of the space on these 2 discs are clips of you taking off and landing from different angles. It is insane. Alright, so I bet you're probably wondering what the end of a game like this could be. I kept thinking to myself maybe the ending would be worth the pain, so I powered through. The game only takes about 2 hours to beat anyway, but it is a long 2 hours. But sure, look, here's the ending.
Military genius is something one is born with, each duel. It cannot be learned.
Yes, Lord.
This is my destiny. victory!
Yeah, so the ending froze. I tried it again and froze again. Yeah, we're gonna wrap things up. The Raven Project is not good. Don't let the 2 discs fool you. This is a shallow game devoid of content and substance. Aggressively unfun from start to finish, and possibly one of the worst games I've ever played to completion, and I didn't even get to see the goddamn ending. What's annoying is that the PC version of this game actually got some decent reviews back in the day. I really don't understand why Cryo didn't attempt to properly bring over the PC version to the PS1, because LucasArts showed that it can be done with Rebel Assault 2. Instead, what we got was Cryo's first failed experiment for the PS1, and for my money, probably the worst one that they've ever created. So bad, even actors in Halloween masks can't save it, and that is a damn shame.
Oh, well that is a shame. We'll all miss you, Jack. There's something I must do first.
You see, dear, I told you the General would understand.
So yeah, that was a trip. Went a bit longer than most volumes as well, but damn did I have shit to say, and well, fuck it, it's my show, so yeah, why not? We got to check out a licensed fighter that punches above its weight. Unfortunately, the system it uses to punch ain't so good. A console exclusive boomer shooter with artwork that belongs in a national gallery. An interesting take on the Pilot Wings formula that is pretty good when the characters aren't haunting your dreams, and Cryo's first PS1 game, which may have caused me irreparable brain damage. As always, we need to slot each game into one of 4 categories. Is the game a must play? Is it something worth trying if you like the look of it? Is the game just kinda meh? Or is the game trash and not worth your time? Today's entries see the Raven Project keeping that Cryo trash streak alive, Rock'em Sock'em Robots and Hybrid making it into the meh tier, and finally Aironauts doing its best to save this episode by making a clean landing into Tri tier. The Raven Project is not very good. In fact, it's actually very, very bad. Every Cryo PS1 game I've played has been pretty bad, but in spite of this being the shortest one, it also felt like it dragged on forever. The live action scenes did keep me motivated to the end, but hey, we all know how that turned out. Since finishing the review, I've since read that the PS1 port was supposedly made by just 2 people in the space of only 7 months, which is an insane amount of time to churn out a game. Really, kudos to them for getting a functioning game out at all, but really I think this is a case where the game just needed more time, more staff, and a bigger budget to truly do the PC version justice. But oh well, at least I got a few chuckles out of the live action scenes, so, you know, that's something. Rock'em Sock'em Robots, great ideas, rough execution. Love beating up robots and taking their parts to build up the custom fighter of my dreams. It's just the fighting system lacks the fluidity, the bite, the technique to really keep you coming back for more. It's a shame because I know Paradox can make a good fighting game using this engine, but this time around, just like its robotic fighters, Rock'em Sock'em Robots is a little bit too rigid for my liking. Hybrid has some decent fundamentals, a big roster of weapons, some great music, and 4 playable characters to dig into, but with really annoying enemies, rough visuals, and an over-reliance on massive maps full of switches and key hunting, well, unfortunately the bad outweighs the good for me. But that being said, if you're a crazy person and love yourself some pixel hunting, maybe Hybrid is the game for you. Either way, at least we'll always have the story segments. And finally we have Aironauts. Now, look, this ain't the best game in the world. It's pretty light on content and replayability, its AI battles kinda suck, and its visuals are certainly an acquired taste, but I still had a fun time with this one. The different mission types and arenas offer up some nice variety, the controls are excellent, and the game provides a genuine challenge without ever feeling unfair. Plus it's got some great music too, so even if I don't think the game will be for everybody, if you like flying and challenges, well, you've no reason not to give this one a try. Now, before we finish up, I'd like to give a special thanks to Doma for your submission to the viewer wheel. Spicy choice, Doma. Glad to have it on the show. Now, if you'd like to submit your choice for a game to appear in future volumes of this series, you can check out the channel update video linked in the information below. And finally, before we finish up, a big thank you to everybody who took the time to tune in today. This channel keeps growing slowly but surely, and I just want you to know I'm grateful to everybody who's been along for the ride. Whether you're a long-time viewer or if it's your first time watching, just know I appreciate you. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video if you liked it and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with future content. I've got plenty more in the pipeline, so as long as you're happy to stick around, I'm happy to keep it coming. Until then, take care of yourselves, and most importantly, don't forget to praise the wheel. See ya!